All right, so we're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart, and that is the power store and how CIG's selling off of many items can negatively harm the gameplay experience, even for the players that are buying the items themselves. Okay, so it's not just that it negatively impacts the player economy, but it has widespread effects across the board, even if you're the one paying for stuff. All right, so to start, it's not supposed to be a vertical line, it's supposed to be a horizontal line. This line is the death of the game. It's not a literal death. It doesn't mean that the company goes under. This is the point where you just lose interest. Okay, this happens in every game, regardless of how much content it has. There will always be some point where you just lose interest, and that is the end of the game, at least as it pertains to you, right? So the line of losing interest. Okay, this line down here is your fresh start. Okay, now everything that you do in a game is going to move you farther from the fresh start and closer to the game death. Okay, so now let's switch to a happier color. Let's call this first echelon the tutorial. Okay, this is where you acquire your first kit of armor, your first weapon. In the case of Star Citizen, maybe your first spaceship, right? This is where you are learning the ropes. Never again will you need to do the tutorial. All right, this is pretty much a given. Everyone who completes a tutorial never does it again, and they have now kind of lost access to that area just above the fresh start. Okay, now you have your first real steps in the game. Right, you kind of know the basic mechanics, so you're going to take your first steps, right? This might see you gaining additional armor, additional vehicles, additional weapons. Generally speaking, this is going to still be fairly easy, so odds of dying still quite low in this area. You might progress a bit higher and higher still. Okay, now about here, you're starting to get to the mid game, right? Things are starting to get a little challenging, so you might actually die at this point. Okay, so what that would be is you go down a peg or two, right? Now, again, we're not all the way down to tutorial, and we're not necessarily all the way down to where we were when we finished our first steps either, right? We've acquired some stuff naturally through the game, especially in the case of an MMO, that serves as kind of a baseline, right? So we could actually kind of give ourselves a baseline here and say, hey, you know what? We've acquired so much stuff in the game that will never fall below this line. Okay, something like that. Let's pretend that it's a straight line. All right. It's kind of hard to do a dotted straight line in Photoshop unless I take more time to do it, but we'll give it a label. Okay. So after you die, and let's actually label that too, so that anyone looking at this diagram later kind of knows what happens, right? So you died. All right. Now you're back down to your baseline, but then you start to grind up again, right? You've learned some things, so you kind of blow past that first death. You've gained skills, like you don't necessarily die the same way again. And you might keep progressing up and up and up. Then you get to the end game. Okay. Now you're in the really difficult content. You can spend a lot of time here in the end game and even in the mid game. You know, let's not lose sight of that too. This can all take a very long time to get to this point. But once you're kind of at that in-game level, you're going to be doing things like raids, you know, I'm just thinking of like Destiny. Like the only real in-game content that thing has for me is raids. But you know, raids and that higher difficulty stuff, that's where you're going to find this stuff. Okay. You're probably going to die again, right? But you can never fall below your baseline, right? So this death does extend your playtime because now you have all this to grind back up, except you're not going to fall back down to the same baseline, are you? You've probably acquired some other checkpoints, so to speak, that are going to keep you from going down to the same level. So your baseline is actually going to move up with that. So now we need to properly label these as old and new baseline. And the reasons why this moved up is along the way through this path, you gained new armor, new kit, access to better vendors, better ships, things like that. And so you're not really going to be using that entry level stuff anymore, right? Like if you are equipped with some legendary gear and you end up dying, well, you're not just going to go back to your blue tier gear, right? You're just going to go to the highest level vendor you have access to and get some new stuff. You probably have plenty of in-game currency stashed away that this doesn't really hurt you that much. So you stay at that higher baseline. But now this does something interesting, because while it is a relief in one way that, oh my gosh, I don't have to do all of that again. And believe me, I'm not saying that I want to do a fresh start every single time I die. Look how much closer we are to our lose interest line. The more you play the game and the more stuff you gain in the game, the closer you get to the lose interest line and the farther you get from the fresh start line. This is where the nostalgia starts to kind of kick in a little bit, because you start to realize at this point that it's never going to be a brand new game for you, right? It's probably something that a lot of Star Citizen players can relate to. But being closer by default to the lose interest line means that you're going to end up there at some point in the future, right? This is a progression towards that point. No one plays the same game forever. All right. Now let's add in microtransactions, or nay, macro transactions, as they're implemented in Star Citizen. What does that do? Well, really, it moves your baseline by a lot. Okay, so let's go to a new layer and let's use a different color to signify our whale. A nice cerulean blue for the sea that they swim in, right? Okay, so first problem with Star Citizen's Power Store is this might actually get you bypassing the tutorial and the first steps entirely. So the fresh start for a whale could actually be up here, okay? And you might do the tutorial, you might not. You might skip your first steps, you might not. You probably do though, because if you've been playing Star Citizen for any length of time, you probably know all the stuff that it would have taught you. And you might not deem it worth the story input to go through and play it. Certainly as the tutorial level is implemented now, I wouldn't blame you for that. It could definitely be a bit better, but that does mean that you skip out on a lot of that initial content. You might just not ever have access to that. But then when you progress, you take the same steps other people do, but because of your increased baseline, you get closer to the lose interest point much faster than a player who doesn't have the same resources you do. And what happens when you die as a whale? Well, everything that you have on your character is a permanent boost to the character itself, which means that your baseline can never be lower than this. Now, again, because of the natural progression of a game, your baseline doesn't stay here either. This is your first baseline. And when you die, you come down to this line. Let's see, we need a special icon for a whale death. There you go. That's a whale death. And then you're going to, again, progress, but this gap between you and the fresh player is the disadvantage of being a whale. This is lost game time. Or let's actually phrase it as lost game lifespan. You can't make that up. It's gone. And so as you progress again, you're going to get more stuff, and then your baseline is going to move too. Just through the natural progression of playing, you're going to acquire new stuff. And in reality, what you actually do is you make it so you cross this line way faster than anyone else would. Okay, let's think about what this means. You have so many ships, so many weapons, so many armors, so much AUEC, or actually at that point it would be UEC, right? You have a base, maybe even have an asteroid base. You've participated in guild stuff. You've done raids. Like, you've done everything. What else is there to do? What has happened is, because you bought so much of your progression, you've cheated yourself out of so much of what could have been a much longer game time. It could have lasted for many years past this, but you lost interest because what else is there left for you to conquer? And that's what I think people don't understand when they're making the arguments about, well, you know, it's my money, I'll spend it how I want to. Yes, I'm not telling you how to spend your money, but do keep this in mind, that you are cheating yourself out of your own game experience. You're making it worse for yourself. All right? There's other aspects of this too. All right, so let's clean this up a bit. Let's go to a new line, or a new layer, I should say. Draw a line across like that, and then I'll actually dot it this way. Down here you have your basic resources, and up here you have everything else, okay? The other thing that a whale account does to a game, as it's implemented in Star Citizen right now, is it takes a lot out of the in-game economy, okay? If I have a spaceship that I'm guaranteed to never lose, then that takes a chunk out of the economy that I'm just never going to have to spend, right? Like, yeah, maybe they turn it into a blueprint and I have to get resources that way, but there's going to be, for sure, a way that I can get my LTI ships back from now until perpetuity, right? And there's still a lot that remains to be answered about insurance and how that's going to work. But actually, let's do it this way. Okay, so this we already established is a LTI ship, right? If I write that, will you guys be able to see it? Yeah, that kind of works, right? Okay, here is a player armor kit. Here is a land claim. These obviously aren't necessarily drawn to scale. An LTI ship would be much bigger than an armor kit. Okay, everything that you can buy on the store that has a gameplay implementation or implication is lost interactions. And then the economy is left with whatever is left. Like it's the patchwork connecting these things. But if you have your LTI ship, you're not really interacting with the economy to get it back. If you have an armor kit, you're not interacting with the economy to get it back. If you have a land claim, you didn't grind to get that land claim, and so you're not struggling for the same resources that everyone else is to get that claim. Everything that you buy is hurting the economy so long as it has a gameplay implication. And a lot of the stuff that CIG sells or has sold does, and that's where it really starts to hurt. Like, what if there is no land left to claim after all the land claims that have already been sold are then implemented in the game? What if all the goods land is already taken? You know, if I know that there is a Quantanium vein, which, you know, they've talked about going back towards doing like underground mining with those little mining towers. What if all the places that have the good Quantanium veins are just taken up by the people who bought claims in the past? Is that necessarily a fair experience? Especially consider a new player who enters the game after Squadron 42. Is it fair that they can't buy any good land because it's already been claimed by someone else? I don't think that it is. That's not a great experience. And then armor kits, sure, like you could turn it into a blueprint and that kind of solves the problem, but it doesn't really address the heart of the issue that CAG has sold gameplay for currency. And that just doesn't work. It ruins your in-game economy. Every LTI ship is a ship that does not have to go through the same resource chain in order to get it back. And so imagine you are trying to make a living in the game, selling components for base tier ships, right? Well, if I have LTI ships and my insurance doesn't actually interact with you being able to sell those base tier components, then who do you sell to? Well, everyone else, I guess. But then now we're talking about a limited subset of players that have no LTI ships. It starts to get really messy. There are some things that CIG could do to rectify these things to a degree. One of them would be like, okay, well, if you have a ship and it explodes and it has LTI, it still pulls from the total amount of resources in the verse. That's kind of what they were trying to do with Quanta, but I don't think that ever really took off. There is still some level of resource management that it might interact with and be able to do that thing. If you're making these base tier components, they could have a vendor that you sell to that is simply a sink for the entire verse, right? Like kind of like Wicklow, I guess. You know, you give components to a Wicklow-esque character, and then it just turns it into nothingness. It just gives you some currency in exchange for it. Like, those things can help, but it doesn't fully fix the issue that is caused by having sold this stuff in the first place. So I hope that this discussion has kind of hopefully opened your eyes a little bit if you were on the fence about why these things are bad. We've looked at this from two perspectives. We looked at this from how a single player affects the entire in-game economy, and keep in mind that this is most Star Citizen players at this point are in one way or another participants in this problem. We've also looked at how simply being a whale shortens the lifespan of the game for you. You're not going to enjoy the game for as long as someone who has spent far less than you on the same game. And this is all of this are major reasons why CIG needs to transition to selling cosmetics, because that is one of the really only way forward that doesn't hinder future progress in the game. There's one final aspect that I want to touch on, and that is, where do you put the incentive for the company you are paying? Right? CIG is that company. How do we allow them to extract value from us, being our money, right? If you sell ships, what you get are ships that are better than the previous ship you bought. It is an incentive for power creep, because they need to have reasons for you to buy each successive ship they release. So you're going to have a Mantis get released that's clearly better than the previous Mantis, has significant advantages over many combat ships, and has some trivial weaknesses. I mean, yeah, it's probably going to get patched. It's going to get adjusted and brought into balance, but not before they will have sold it for money, right? And this is just going to keep happening unless CIG changes the funding model. I think we're at a point now where they can do that and be okay. They have enough gameplay that if they made this change, it would be a huge act of goodwill with players, and it would give them an opportunity to really kind of spread their wings and try and sell the cosmetics, like go full in. But it would be a net positive for the game overall. In the past, I could see the argument that, well, you know, we never would have gotten this far without selling ships. Okay, fine. Let's say I just give you that, right? Well, the strongest argument in your favor would have been that there was very little gameplay to go with it besides the ships. So literally, what can you sell besides ships when you don't have any gameplay? I don't think that's true today. I think there is enough gameplay to keep people invested. And as long as you actually pull off this year of stability, that you can, now is a great time to try switching to cosmetics. Put that on for a spin and see where it goes. See, I'm going to save this off as a separate Photoshop document so I can use it later. I'm going to call it Whales Kill Games. But again, I hope that this has opened your mind if you were on the fence, and I hope that you can see why these things are bad for the game at large. And hopefully you'll come to my side of the table and be with me on fighting for CIG changing things. We need to start focusing on cosmetics. Sell crap loads of cosmetics. Stop selling ships. Stop selling gameplay. Stop selling things that have gameplay implications, and just focus on making good cosmetics. Plenty of games have gone the cosmetics route. They make tons of money. It will be okay. All right. But if you like what you see, Like, share, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube things. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you're watching this as a stream, don't tune out. We are still streaming after this. This is just an outro for people who are watching this after the fact. It's a YouTube video. Channel memberships is always an option. So, just putting that out there. John Best and the crew get a special mention each and every time I do a stream or video as Orbital Bombardier members. But until next time, this is Odd Job Entertainment, signing off.